So I'm doing a new episode of I Try to Explain. This time, I'm doing Day of Infamy, the new game on Steam by the same guys that made Insurgency. It originally started out as a World War II total conversion mod for Insurgency, but then the Insurgency devs helped the original mod devs turn it into a full-fledged game, and it's now out on early access for about like $20. And if you already own Insurgency, you get a 15% discount, which, it'd be nice if it was more, but because pretty much everyone owns Insurgency, because you can get it for like $2 on Green Man Gaming or G2A, which I probably wouldn't recommend G2A, but, it's a cheap game. Almost everybody owns it, so if they gave a bigger discount for owning it, they would barely make any money on the new game. So, I understand it. So, as you can probably tell from the gameplay, it's pretty much exactly like Insurgency, but they added some new stuff to it and made it World War II. Some of the new stuff includes, like, the ability to call in artillery and flamethrowers, which, it's cool. And right now I'm just going to go through all the different classes. The way they did the classes, I like it better here than in Insurgency, because, like, they gave all the classes the same names throughout all the three factions, which, there's still only 2 teams per map, like per match, but depending on what map you're playing on, you can either be playing as, like, the British or the Americans. The Germans are still the only ones, like, you can't play as Italians or whatnot, It's still early access, they might add that later. But yeah, so you can either play as the Americans or the British, depending on what map. So, like, Omaha Beach will have the Americans, Sicily will have the British, fairly obvious there. So with the different classes, you got the officer, who's the one that can call an arty. You can equip SMGs or rifles, and pistols and whatnot, obviously. He can call an arty if he's near a radio, which can either be a stationary radio or one that one of your teammates has equipped on his back, which, you can spend your like, what's the name of it? I don't know, but like the equipment points that you have on a radio, instead of like you can get rid of your secondary and equip that, or get rid of your grenades and equip that instead. It's the same way Insurgency did it with the different points. And so yeah, the other classes, the rifleman, obviously just a guy with a rifle, either bolt action or semi-automatic, depending on whether or not, like what faction you're playing as. The assault will be the guy with automatic weapons that, like, runs into the capture points and whatnot. So he'll have, like, a Thompson or a Sten, MP40, or an STG, because you can upgrade once you get enough points to a different gun. Although there's not nearly as many guns that you can upgrade to from Insurgency. Like, with Insurgency, like, if you're playing as the sniper, you can get either, like, the bolt action, or you can get, like, an SKS, an FAL, or the M14. But if you're playing as a sniper in Day of Infamy, depending on what faction you're on, there's either going to be 2 or even only 1 sniper. So, like, if you're playing as the Germans, you can have the Kar 98 or the G43. But if you're playing as the British, you only have the Enfield, and if you're the Americans, you only have the Springfield. You can't equip an M1 Garand with a scope, which, I wish you could, but, you can't. The engineer is the explosives guy, or the flamethrower guy, which, whichever one you want is going to depend on the map. For example, if you're the Americans on D-Day, you're not going to want a flamethrower. You're probably going to want to go for the bazooka instead, or a bunch of grenades instead, so you can take out the bunkers. I mean, a flamethrower could be useful, but it won't be nearly as useful as the explosives there. But if you're on Sicily, whether or not you're playing as the Germans or the British, flamethrower is going to be a lot more useful than the rockets 9 times out of 10. And then you have the support, which is one of the 2 machine gunner classes. The difference is, well, like each faction has 2 different machine guns. For example, the Americans have the BAR and the other belt-fed one. The Germans have the MG34 and the MG42. The actual dedicated machine gunner class will, you'll be able to choose between both. But with support, you're only going to be able to choose one. For example, with the Americans, if you're playing a support, you can only choose the BAR. You can't choose the belt-fed one. And by default, he will come with the radio equipped for the officer, which, only giving him the BAR makes sense for that, because he's going to want to be moving up with the officer and staying with him. And having a belt-fed machine gun while you're pushing up just isn't good. You're going to want the magazine-fed one, the BAR. And then there's the sniper, obviously. One thing that I like about Day of Infamy a lot more than Insurgency is the weapon balance. Although the flamethrowers are a little OP, the pistols will kill people in 1 to 2 shots. I remember in Insurgency it taking 3. It could take up to 3 or 4 shots. It'll only take 1 or 2 here. And there's one of the things that I think the reason why that is because there's no armor. You can't equip armor. When you equip the heavy kit or the light kit, it's not armor, you're equipping more ammo. Because if you think back to World War II, they wouldn't have had Kevlar or whatnot. It would have, having a heavy kit would have just been more ammo, no more armor. So yeah, that's all the classes there. I'll just go back on the arty. When you call in artillery, you can either call in normal artillery or smoke artillery. Smoke artillery is just pretty much the effect of multiple smoke grenades. And obviously normal arty is, just it'll blow stuff up. What I don't like about the artillery is the way you call in is, you have to go through, the radial voice commands. You click on the center for radio commands, and then you go over to call arty or smoke arty. Or if someone, there's no radio near you, you can hit request radio, not radio. That's not how you say that word. So what I don't like is how when you go to call an arty, you have to go through a bunch of different menus. You can't really do it on the fly, which, I understand that, because if you could, it would be a bit overpowered, but still a bit, it's a bit frustrating when you go into call an arty, but because you have to go through all these menus, the people you're trying to hit with it are already moved by the time you get through all the different menus. And also, the way you call it in, it's hard to call it in accurately, because the way you do it, you just look at where you want to call it in, and then you call it in. It doesn't open up a map or anything, you just call it in while looking at your target, which, that caused a lot of problems for me when I was playing, because a lot of times I go to call it in, and then the radio guy is a complete fucking idiot. It just runs in front of me while I'm calling it in. So then it calls down the arty on us and blows us up instead of the enemies, because the guy was a fucking idiot and got up while I was calling it in. Which, it gets a little frustrating, but, they could easily fix that just by having a map come up. So, and then you just click on it, although it's probably a lot easier to code it with it just having you look at it and then call it in instead of looking at a map, opening up a map menu. So yeah, that's one thing that I don't like about the arty, although I do understand why it is the way it is. Well, I'm assuming that I'm just assuming it's easier. It might not be, but if that is true, if my assumption is correct, then there is a reason for it being the way that it is. Currently with the maps, the way the maps are set up is certain maps can only be played on certain game modes, which I don't like that. But I can kind of understand it, because some maps just don't work for certain game modes. for example, the game mode where both teams have points that you have to capture. Like there's a point in the middle, and then like I'm not explaining this correctly. Well, like each team owns control points, and you have to capture the other team's control points. That game mode would just straight up would not work on the D-Day map. The Germans would just win all the time. I mean, they kind of do already win all the time, but there is a chance that the Americans can win. But if it was like that, where the Germans just had to storm down the hill, like, they would win pretty much immediately. Like, that game mode just would not work on that map at all. Same thing with Sicily, because it's the D-Day style map, where it's like a beach landing and you rush up into like a little town. You know, like that game mode just would not work for it, but offensive, which is the game mode that they use for those maps, is, you know, it's set up perfectly for that. Well, that doesn't really work on, I think it's called Camacho, which uses the game mode I mentioned first, but like the other one just doesn't really work well on that map. So yeah, that's the different game modes. There's, I think, 3 maps per game mode, or it's a total of 5. Actually, I think, yeah, total of 5, because there are some maps that work for multiple game modes. Like there's one game mode which I think was ripped straight from Insurgency, where there's 3 control points, and it's pretty much team deathmatch, but when you capture a control point, your team gets more respawn waves, and the map that takes place in France, I forget the name of it. They don't have very very memorable names, like with CS:GO maps or like Halo maps. So like if I was to say like Midship or Blood Gulch, if you played Halo, you'd know immediately. But if you play Day of Infamy and I say like Camacho or Dog Red, you won't really know instantly unless you played a shitload of that game. So yeah, I have trouble like remembering some of the map names. But yeah, like the map that takes place in it's like a forested area in France. It works for both offensive and the like team deathmatch style one, where there's like 3 control points. You know, like it works well with both of those. And it's used for both those, and it works well for both. Although I think offensive, it's a lot better, but it does work properly and is not completely unbalanced in the second game mode. Like shooting mechanics wise, it's exactly the same as Insurgency, just with different weapons. And well, besides the flamethrowers, obviously, like, you know, there weren't flamethrowers in the original Insurgency, so, you know, they had to figure out, like, they couldn't just port it over because it wasn't there to begin with. Excuse me. So yeah, that's all I can really think of off the top of my head of Day of Infamy, although some of the maps aren't balanced very well. I was wrong, I can't think of more things. For example, Bastogne, which is like a winter map. I think it's in Belgium. But like it's very, very unbalanced. Pretty much whichever team wins is the one with more snipers. Like that's it. It's just that open. That like if your team doesn't have any snipers or doesn't have good snipers, you're just gonna lose. It almost completely depends on the snipers whether or not you're gonna win. Which I don't really like that, because it's putting the whole game on 2 people per team, which I don't like that. They really need to fix that, although I don't think they really can, because it's just too open. It's not a good map in my opinion. Also on Dog Red, which is the Omaha Beach map, I would say 9 times out of 10 the Germans win. Which, you know, with that, like, you can't really do anything with it unless you... Well, there is one thing. You could do it the way the Day of Defeat did it, which is increase the respawn timer on the Germans as opposed to the Americans. Like, have the Americans spawn in faster. Which that's the only thing that really comes to mind that you could balance that. Because, like, if you spawn in at the same rates, then, like, taking out all of the machine gunners and the snipers as the Americans so that you can move up doesn't really work, because when you do that, by the time you have everyone respawn and you have enough people to move in and take the bunker, the machine gunners and snipers are already respawned and are shooting at you again. So, but if the Germans took a longer time to respawn, then the Americans would actually be able to move up and capture the bunker. Although once you get past the first point, it kind of turns into like the Americans. Well, it's like the first point, the Germans will win 9 times out of 10. The second point, the Americans will capture within 2 minutes, because it's like the Germans just are unable to defend it, because around the point there's like, it's just way too open. Like, there's no place to take cover around it if you're looking at like towards the beachhead where the Americans would be. Like, when they're charging, like, you have no place to hide. But if you're a German trying to move up to recapture the point, the Americans have a shitload of cover. Like, they can, like, there's a bunch of things they can hide behind. So that point is pretty much gone. The third point is kind of even, honestly. The only thing that really makes it not that even is by the time you get to that point, the Germans will be almost out of respawn waves, but the Americans will have like 30 waves still, because they capped all the points and they got more points. Well, not point. They got more waves each time they capped a point. So it'll be like 30 waves against 5, which is how it initially starts. So I guess, you know, it kind of balances out in a way. But it is definitely still possible to win as the Germans once you get past the first point, but you won't be able to like actually defend the second point on that map, which, you know, but if the Americans somehow take the first and second points like really early on in the game, then both teams will have about 30 waves on the third point, and it'll be basically an even fight. So yeah, that's just some thoughts on some of the maps. Obviously, I didn't touch on all of them, because that would just take a long time. And this is just kind of like a quick video series where I just talk for like 20 minutes or so about a game that I've been playing. And so far, they have all been multiplayer shooters, from like Killing Floor to Ghost in the Shell to this. They've all been multiplayer first-person shooters. So yeah, I really need to do these about a different type of game. You know, maybe I don't know, like an RPG or something, I don't know. But although the RPGs I play are a bit mainstream, like The Witcher and Elder Scrolls. So yeah, that's just a couple of quick thoughts on Day of Infamy. I definitely recommend you pick it up. Well, one other quick thing is that the name, they probably just tried to copy Day of Defeat. You know, it's very similar, the inspiration in the name. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed me just kind of rambling on about the game. And I'll see you in the next video.